top standings in their particular division as well, you know. So you're talking about a team that's 7-4. They're coming in. They want to maintain their lead over the Minnesota Vikings right now, and you have Green Bay that, you know, if they could be able to make a push, they could be able to vie for that top spot as well. So they're only 2 games out. Here, this is the time where the Saints are going to have to show that they mean business. If they're going to win, if they will give themselves a chance to win, they have to take this team seriously. They have to be able to perform at the high level that they're capable of performing. And, right, you said it earlier, Sean Payton has to continue with his creativity and be able to do something to be able to throw these guys off base. You know, so can it be done? I think it can. Will it be done? Let's see.
Yeah, I think, and I mentioned this before, I told a couple people on Twitter, and they kind of took it off guard to what I was saying, but in terms of on paper, the Rams don't have a strong roster. They have a solid roster, which I guess you can make the same argument for New Orleans, but when you read about, you know, some of their leaders right now, Raphael Bush in the secondary is arguably their best player. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can make a name for a couple of others, but he's definitely up there. So you've got Raphael Bush, who is a former Saint. Everybody remembers, probably had a lot of mixed feelings when he left. Right. You've got guys like, you know, Theo Riddick leading in their, you know, rushing yards right at 4 yards a carry. Not exactly strong. Their second their second leading rusher this year is actually Matthew Stafford, so not a lot of run game to talk about. He's only thrown for 83 yards. He hasn't hit the 3K mark. Their receivers are guys like Marvin Jones, Golden Tate, Eric Ebron. I mean, an old Anquan Bolden. They don't have the Calvin Johnsons of old. They're just a team that finds a way to win. You know, that's the best way to put it. They've only got 20 sacks. Like, if you were to look at this team on paper and then try to guess their record, you wouldn't guess that they have 7 wins. You wouldn't guess that they're first in their division. You know, but as I tried to bring up earlier, let me point out some of the teams that they beat. Los Angeles, who we just beat. Washington, who, I mean, that's a good case for, you know, they beat a legitimate team. Washington's doing well this season, but they beat Jacksonville. They beat Minnesota twice, and Minnesota has just been crashing and burning. I mean, they started off strong and have completely collapsed. They beat Indianapolis week 1, but they've lost to teams like Chicago. They've lost to the Houston Texans. Mm-hmm. I mean, they lost to Tennessee. So when they've played a lot of playoff caliber teams, with the exception of Washington, they haven't been able to win. They beat teams that were below them in terms of strength and overall ability. Whereas New Orleans, you can make the opposite argument. Most of the teams that they've beat have been better than them either in rankings or on paper. And even the ones that they've lost to, like the Chiefs and, you know, the Broncos and the Raiders, are playoff caliber teams. So the strength of schedule to me heavily favors the Saints, even though they have the worst record. I think that they're the better team here. It's just, can they perform on a consistent level? We've seen them too many times underperform or miss out because they weren't doing things correctly. They were calling bad plays. They were doing the whole, let's try to run 3 passes and see if it works. You know, silly stuff like that. If they can do the play calling, specifically if Sean Payton can come with the same, you know, ire against the opposing defensive coordinator like he had against Greg Williams, I don't think the Lions stand a chance.
Yeah, we better tell Sean Payton we heard Caldwell was talking about his mama or something. Got to put him on check there, man. But, you know, I've seen, I believe, 4 Lions games. And each of the games never really had me saying, golly, this is a team that cannot be beat. I just think they have played well in the games they should have played well in, you know, or down the stretch that they should have played well down the stretch. We can't say the same for us. You know, if we've played well down the stretch in most of these games, the Saints could easily just have 2 losses on their record. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's just, for me, especially the last 3 games they've had, which was 2 Minnesota games and a Jacksonville game. And if anybody that wasn't passed out from turkey on Thanksgiving watched the Minnesota game.
Right.
Minnesota literally gave them the game. And I'm not saying
Yes.
that in form of an expression.
Yes, he
Minnesota had the ball.
Yeah.
We're just going to – all they had to do was run out the clock. They didn't have to do anything fancy. They just had to run it up the middle a few times and then kneel it out. They turn it over and give the ball back to Detroit and let them not only get the ball back, they turned it over when the Vikings were probably going to kick that winning field goal, go home happy.
Right.
Instead, they give the ball right over into the game, few seconds left, and Stafford and company, who Stafford barely threw 200 yards. They didn't have a single rusher who hit 50 yards. They didn't have a single 100-yard receiver. They did nothing basically all game offensively, get given a game. They only beat the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are, bottom of the barrel in the league right now, by one touchdown. They gave up 20 points to them, and then they had to beat Minnesota in overtime after losing to the Houston Texans. So, I mean, to me, their performances have been very underwhelming, and I think that New Orleans has a big advantage there. Now, there has to be something said for the grit factor. For them to have the stats that they have and have 7 wins, that's something that you can't compute on paper in black and white and in numbers. That's that it factor that some teams just have in those magical seasons like New York had when they won their 2 Super Bowls. Nobody watched them during the season and thought, man, this team is going to demolish the Patriots in the Super Bowl. If you did, you're lying, quit, get off podcasts and don't talk football. You're lying.
Right.
But yet they had that factor. They were able to overcome. I'm not saying that the Lions win the Super Bowl this year or anything like that. I'm just saying so far this year they have found ways to win, and that's what winners do.
Right.
But in terms of the Saints against the Lions, one game Sunday, looking at it up ahead, the Saints have the biggest advantage for me. I mean, to me, they're 10 to 15-point favorites because of what they were able to do recently with the health that they've been brought back to, with guys like Ellerbe and Rankins back who have made a huge difference in the defense. It's just a different team. Even Jarris Byrd is looking like a solid player, and we've been calling for his head for quite some time now.
Yeah, we sure have. So, well, I mean, you make valid points. You make valid points, man. The thing that I want to see the Saints continue to do is continue to run the ball, make a concerted effort in making sure that Ingram and Hightower are in the run game. Defensively, the thing that the Detroit Lions are really going to have to be concerned with, they give up more touchdowns. I think they're -1 touchdown across the board compared to their opponents. So this is not a team that scores a lot of points, like you said, but they have taken advantage of the mistakes of their opponents. So the Saints, we could be mistake prone. How well are we going to be able to protect the football? How well are we going to be able to be consistent in making sure that we can be able to create some turnovers? Because Stafford, just like Drew Brees, he likes to throw a lot. So the potential for a turnover is there. So I wonder how we're just going to perform as a whole, man. And we just can't have any emotional letdowns as well.
I think that's a big factor for it. I will say that there's been a lot more consistency in terms of how the offense has been performing. Just if you look at it, just take Drew Brees' numbers, for example, starting in September to now in November. September to the month, he threw 66%. October, he threw 72%. November, he's throwing 75.8% completion.
Wow.
So we've seen a continual increase, and he's gone from going 8 touchdowns in September, 10 in October, now 13 in November. And it's not just him. The rushing game has improved. We only ran 244 yards in September. October came around 373. November, we're at over 600 yards rushing and have 4 TDs.
Wow.
So it's been the whole offense has continually improved. We talk about the defense, but the offense, here's what we said about the offense at the beginning of the year. They were the best in yards, but they couldn't put up points. They weren't consistent. But now it's flipped. I mean, they've gotten consistent. They're, I'm not sure if they still are, but they're at least last week, they were the best third down team in the NFL. They're one of the best fourth down teams in the NFL. They're one of the best short yardage teams in the NFL. They consistently brought it every game so far in very recent memory. So that's a very encouraging thing for me when they have to play a team like the Lions. I think we got Curious on from Saints Nation. Is that you, bud?
Yes, it is.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm doing real good after this sports weekend I just had.
Oh, yeah?
Oregon
Besides
State
the Saints?
beat Oregon. Harbaugh had to suck an entire bucket load of eat dick. And the Saints absolutely skull dragged
You have been muted.
the Rams.
To unmute yourself,
and
press
Sean
the star
Payton
key
was at
twice.
his petty best, and I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a good win for us all around. The only question, I mentioned it during the show and Kyle's talked about, is can Sean Payton continue the intensity? Because I'm not sure if you heard, but I've said it multiple times. That was the best play calling in a 4-quarter period that I've seen Sean Payton do since our stretch from 2009 to 2011. He's shown spurts and glimmers in terms of 1 quarter here or maybe 1 half here in the past couple of years. But that's the best I've seen him do in a 4-quarter stretch since his suspension. Can he continue it? If he does, the team seems unstoppable on offense. It's just he hasn't had that consistency until Sunday.
I mean, I'll mostly agree with that, but with 2 caveats. One is the Giants game against Spagnuolo's defense last year. If that's not just as good of play calling, it's just the most infinitesimally small amount below it, because they absolutely shredded the Giants and did absolutely everything they wanted to. I just think it doesn't stick out as your mind as much because of the performance of the defense in the same game.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I didn't throw it up there, because Sunday it seemed like Sean Payton, I know this is more on DA because he's done so well in the second half in the past 6 games, but it seemed like Sean was not going to let the defense do anything wrong. He was sitting there whispering every play Greg Williams was trying to run defensively, and every play that they were going to try offensively, he was going to make sure that we demolished them that game. Whereas the Spagnuolo game, I had no idea where it was going. It was heads or tails.
Yeah, I mean, I think Drew was the one that took the Spagnuolo game more personal than Sean did.
Yeah. It just seemed like, and I know Brian talked
Drew
about
Drew seemed to be the one that was just like, no, I'm going to embarrass you.
There was just an obvious fire on Peyton, even on the sidelines. I haven't seen him that lit up in years, because it wasn't just one play he got lit up and was running down the sidelines. This guy was on fire every quarter. Like he was the Sean Payton of old.
4-yard runs, he was losing his mind.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that, we haven't seen him do that throughout an entire game in years. And that's why, to me, this is just my personal opinion, that was his best game since suspension, because he's had that consistent, he was just out of his mind. Every play he knew was being called was the best play, and just in the play calling alone. That's why I thought it was the best. And I add that to the fact that we did that against the number 2 defense in the NFL. We didn't do that against the Indianapolis Colts defense or the Dallas defense.
Number 2 scoring defense.
That's big when you're talking about the Saints.
Yeah.
That's holding back the behemoth that the Saints can score 40 points. We came out and said, yeah, we're going to score, 40 points and more. That's why it's so impressive to me.
Yeah, it's definitely impressive. I think it's tough to say it from a play calling standpoint, just because you can have the perfect play dialed up and the team doesn't execute. So that one, just for me, it's difficult to say like this was his greatest game since then, just because Peyton's dissected the Panthers defense multiple times, and they've been on a level that, like, even this Rams team statistically, part of that's the offenses they've played. The Panthers defense of the last couple of years has been much better than them, and Peyton has absolutely torched them consistently. So, like,
let me add more to it.
It's tough for me to say it's the best. But
let me add a little bit more to it why I feel that way too, because I talked about a lot more in the first half of the show, but a lot of it was the creativity in the play calling as well. I mean, we didn't just see simple things like, jet sweeps. It was the fact that you had, lining up multiple tackles on one side and then using a tight end as a tackle on the other side to open up specific rushing lanes for Ingram. just the creativity he showed was more than just we're going to come out in the pistol formation and run this play. It was the stuff that we have